Yugioh VRAINS is by far one of my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh series of all time. After almost 6 years, we finally had a more serious and mature protagonist like Yusei Fuda, who played with interesting strategies and combos. But most importantly, we got to see a lot of old school cards being played in the anime, which we hadn't seen in a long time. In this video, I'll be going over the top 10 old school cards that were played in Yu-Gi-Oh VRAINS. And at number 10, we have Temple of the Kings. Temple of the Kings was played by Byra, or Clarissa Turner in the English dub, in episode 25 of Yu-Gi-Oh VRAINS. What the card does is it allows you to activate one trap card that you set per turn. You can also send one Mystical Beast of Circuit along with Temple of the Kings to the graveyard in order to special summon one monster from your hand or deck, or one fusion monster from your extra deck, and you can only use each of these effects once per turn. Now, being able to special summon any monster from your hand or deck is a very good effect, especially if you can special summon a fusion monster from your extra deck. However, this effect is balanced by the fact that Mystical Beast of Circuit is a level 6 monster that can't be easily searched and summoned, and has the effect where it's destroyed if you don't control Temple of the Kings. It also has an effect where it gains 500 attack each time it destroys a monster by battle, which isn't a very good effect. However, you can cheat around the summoning effect of Temple of the Kings by using a card like Foolish Burial to send Mystical Beast of Circuit to your graveyard, and then copy its name with a card like Phantom of Chaos, a card that is much easier to summon and search out. But for all the effort it is to bring it out, Mystical Beast of Circuit is easily destroyed if Temple of the Kings leaves the field, so your opponent can just destroy Temple of the Kings with a card like MST and you lose your monster. You can, however, purposely summon it and have it be destroyed by its own effect to summon monsters like the Mech Lords, although it doesn't seem like it's worth the effort. Because Temple of the Kings can allow you to send Mystical Beast of Circuit to the graveyard to summon powerful fusions like the Invoked Makaba, Naturia Exterio, and Last Warrior from Another Planet, it can be used for some niche purposes, and can certainly be fun to build a casual deck around it. Temple of the Kings mostly sees play, if at all, for its first effect, where you can activate one trap card the turn it was set, which is a really good effect, since most of the time you have to set traps, and wait one turn before you can activate them. It was actually pretty good before it got errated, and served as a pseudo Makura the Destructor, because before it got errated, Temple of the Kings let you activate any number of trap cards the turn that you set them, which is absolutely broken, and explains why it got errated. Even now, you can use it in any deck that absolutely needs to use a trap card the turn that you draw it, such as Fusion Material. It also allows you to use continuous traps the turn you draw into them, as well as reuse cards like Scrap Iron Scarecrow or Scrap Iron Statue after you use them during your opponent's turn, and they've been reset. But Temple of the Kings is really hard to search out and explains why it sees absolutely no competitive play. And at number 9, we have Double Summon. This card was used by Brave Max or Brave Battler in the English dub in episode 60 of Yu-Gi-Oh VRAINS. What the card does is it allows you to conduct 2 normal summons the turn you activate it, which is a good effect since you're usually allowed only 1 normal summon per turn unless you use another card effect. The card saw some play across the years and performed really well in decks that required or benefited from multiple normal summons in a turn, such as Synchro decks if they run Junk Synchron, or decks like Gadgets to prevent you from losing card advantage upon being normal summoned. One of the best ways to use this card is in a Naturia deck, where you can tribute summon a Naturia monster to summon Naturia Bamboo Shoot in the same turn, and immediately lock your opponent out of spells and traps. You can also use this card after summoning Raw Sphere mode in order to still have a normal summon for that turn. The reason this card doesn't see that much play, though, is that although it gives you an additional normal summon, that's all the card does. It doesn't give you any card advantage, and doesn't search or protect your cards. And this explains why some players choose to forego having an additional normal summon if they can run other cards that can give them greater benefits. At number 8, we have Megamorph, used by the Knight of Hanoi in episode 65 when he was trying to solve the duel puzzle. This equip spell is one of the oldest cards in the game, released as early as 2004 in the TCG, and has seen instances of play throughout the years. This equip spell has the effect to double the original attack of the equipped monster if your life points are lower than your opponent's, but it could also have the original attack of the equipped monster if your life points are higher than your opponent's. Normally, you would play this card to increase the attack of your own monster if you were losing and your opponent had more life points than you, so that you could run over one of their monsters by battle and hopefully turn the game around. But it could also be used to purposely lower your opponent's monster's attack as well if you had more life points than your opponent. This card saw some play in Demise OTK decks, where players would use Demise King of Armageddon to nuke the field, and then equip it with this card to try and push for an OTK alongside cards like Doom Dozer, if you were running a Demise OTK deck with bugs. But more recently, I've actually seen some creative uses of this card, like equipping it to something like Appaloosa, to double its attack so that it could have twice as many effect negations, since Megamorph changes the original attack of the monster it's equipped with. And nowadays, because there are so many cards that can be used to lower your points willingly, like Destrudo, lowering your life points isn't as slow as it used to be. And at number 7, we have Forbidden Lance. which was used in episode 64 of Yugioh VRAINS by Playmaker, or Unknown, as he was called at the time he used it in the anime. This is a quick play spell that makes a monster unaffected by spells and traps at the cost of losing 800 attack. This card saw a healthy amount of play over the years, as it was pretty versatile in how it was used. You could not only use it to protect your monsters from spells and traps like Mirror Force and Raigeki, but you could also use Forbidden Lands to make your opponent's monsters weaker in order to run them over by battle, or even make your opponent's monsters unaffected by spells and traps that your opponent could use, like limit or removal. The only issue with this card is that it's more of a protection card, and doesn't really give you any card advantage or help with any combo plays. Also, if you use it to protect your monsters, you can only save one monster, so it's not as strong as if it protected all of your monsters, like Evil Swarm Infestation. And at number 6 we have Machine Duplication. This card was used by Prototype Green A in episode 16 of Yugioh VRAINS. This card has the effect where you target a face-up machine-type monster you control with 500 or less attack, and special summon up to 2 monsters from your deck with the same name as the face-up monster. When this card was first released back in 2004, it didn't see that much play as there weren't really any good targets except for a card like Card Trooper. But over the years, it has started to see play in various decks, such as Cyber Dragons, to target Cyber Dragon Core and special summon up to 2 Cyber Dragons from your deck for Fusion or Xyz summon, and Morphtronic decks to target Morphtronic Selphon, who can then use its effect to potentially swarm the field, and Desk Bots to special summon pretty much all of their main deck monsters as they all have 500 base attack, and in Spirals to target Quick Fix to special summon 2 more from your deck and then add 2 Spiral Gear cards from your deck to your hand. You can also use cards like DNA Surgery to turn monsters you control with 500 or less attack into machine type so they can be a target for this card. What makes this card great is that it can be a potential +1 in card advantage since you're special summoning, for no cost, up to 2 monsters from your deck, which is a very good way of bringing monsters out. However, because you can only use it on cards with a certain type and attack value, it's balanced by the fact that your pool of targets is much smaller. Nevertheless, if you have a way to work around the restrictions with a card that changes attack value or monster type like DNA Surgery, you can also use this card to your advantage in many different scenarios. You can even combo it with Riprodocus and change the type of a monster it points to Machine so you can use Machine Duplication on the monster afterwards. Next up at number 5 we have Mind Crush, which was used by Revolver in episode 97 against Lightning, to force Lightning to discard Judgment Arrows and disrupt his play. Mind Crush has seen a good amount of play over the years, especially in side decks and mirror matches, when you know what cards your opponent might be playing. What the card does is you declare one card in your opponent's hand. If they have the card you declared, they must discard all copies of it. If they don't have the declared card in their hand, you discard one card. Now this might seem like a risky play at first glance, since without a card to tell you what's in your opponent's hand, it's difficult to know what they have. However, given that there are so many good search cards in the game, like Fossil Dig or Reinforcements of the Army, you can at least be certain that they have the card they just searched, and therefore make them discard it to disrupt their turn. This card also saw play in Dark World decks, since even if you called the wrong card, you got to see your opponent's hand, which can help you strategize against them, and you could discard a Dark World monster, like Grapha, thus triggering its effect. Nevertheless, Mind Crush has proven itself to be a strong disruptive card, especially given all the searching that's done in today's meta, but considering how many decks use the graveyard as a second hand, discarding cards from your opponent's hand might actually help them in certain situations. And at number 4 we have Magic Cylinder, a card used by Revolver and subsequently Windy in episode 69 of Yugioh VRAINS. Magic Cylinder is one of the most iconic cards of old school Yu-Gi-Oh! And can single-handedly punish your opponent if they overextend and summon a really strong monster, thus winning you the game, as what the card does is when your opponent's monster declares an attack, you target their monster and negate the attack. Then you inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack points of their monster. Magic Cylinder was played alongside Mirror Force back in the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! When battle traps really dominated the game, and other than cards like MST and Dust Tornado, there weren't that many back row removal to deal with these cards. Over the years, however, it slowly saw less play, except in gimmick decks or decks focusing on dealing effect damage, like Burn. What makes it even less useful in the current game is that stopping one attack and dealing effect damage isn't very useful unless it deals enough damage to win you the game. It's also not as versatile as cards like Mirror Force, where you can potentially wipe out all of your opponent's monsters if they're in attack position, thus gaining card advantage over your opponent. Finally, Magic Cylinder targets the monster that's attacking, which can be annoying because certain monsters have targeting protection, like Red Eyes Dark Dragoon or Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon, and there are a number of boss monsters that are unaffected by other card effects, like Ultimate Falcon. What would make this card better is if it didn't target or if it ended the battle phase after negating the attack. For inflicting damage without targeting monsters, cards like Dimension Wall would be even better, even though it doesn't negate the attack, so the attack would still go through. And at number 3 we have Limiter Removal. This card was used by Playmaker in episode 64 and was limited for a long time, and only recently became semi-limited in 2018, and for good reason. because what this card does is it doubles the attack of all machine-type monsters on your field until the end phase, but during the end phase, those monsters affected by limiter removal are destroyed. Why this card was so good is because it could double the current attack of all the machine-type monsters you control until the end phase, and not just the original attack value of the monsters. This meant that you could easily OTK your opponent if you had enough machine-type monsters on the field, with strong stats to begin with. Also, you could use something like DNA Surgery to turn all your monsters into machines in order to use this card on them. Because this card could easily help you OTK by just stacking this card on top of itself, since it didn't have a once per turn clause, it got limited way back in 2005 and stayed that way until 2019 when it finally came off the ban list. This card's drawback wasn't that bad either, since you could use the monsters affected by limiter removal to summon a new monster in main phase 2 after you were done attacking and assuming your opponent survived, by attributing the monsters for a tribute summon or using them for an XYZ or link summon, thus circumventing their destruction. Of course, if you just won that turn, you wouldn't have to worry about the drawback of your monsters being destroyed. At number 2, we have Imperial Order. This card was used by Revolver in episode 78 against Blood Shepherd. I hope you're all seeing a pattern here, which is that Revolver uses all these old school cards that are still very strong and very annoying to deal with. What Imperial Order does is that it negates all spells on the field, but during both players' standby phase, you have to pay 700 life points in order to keep using it. Otherwise, it's destroyed. This card was banned for more than a decade and only came off the ban list in 2017. Which makes sense since negating all spells on the field is one of the most powerful effects in the game, even if it affects the player controlling Imperial Order as well. And back in the day, unless you had Jinzo or Dust Tornado, you couldn't get rid of this card easily since it negated spells that could potentially destroy it, like MST. But seeing as how players nowadays have so many outs to this card in the form of monsters like Tornado Dragon or Nightmare Phoenix, it makes sense that this card could finally be unbanned and allow players to use it. And before I reveal the number 1 spot on this list, our honorable mentions for this video include Marauding Captain, Photon Thrasher, and Monster Reincarnation. Marauding Captain and Photon Thrasher were used by Playmaker in his duel against the Knight of Hanoi in episode 64. In the actual card game, Marauding Captain and Photon Thrasher were used in decks that spammed out rank 3s and rank 4s respectively, and also saw play in Dark Warrior decks that went into Isolde. Monster Reincarnation was shown in episode 49 of Yugioh VRAINS, when Soulburner was dueling Bit and Boot. But unfortunately, Soulburner never got to use this card because of Bit and Boot's trap card, D-Scale's Chaff, which negated the cards in Soulburner's hand, including this one, even though it makes perfect sense for his Salamangreat deck to include it, since it helps set up his graveyard while recovering key cards like Salamangreat Gazelle. But I'm only including this card as an honorable mention as it never actually ended up being used in Soulburner's duel against Bit and Boot, even though it's a decent card. And finally, at number 1, we have Mirror Force. This card was used numerous times by Revolver in the VRAINS anime, and rightly so, since Revolver figured out that because Link monsters couldn't be in defense mode, they would have to be in attack position, thus making them susceptible to Mirror Force. What Mirror Force does is when your opponent's monster declares an attack, you can activate it to destroy all their attack position monsters. This card has made so many players rage quit and ruined so many friendships, because having your field of say 5 or 6 monsters completely wiped out by a single trap card when you could have potentially won that turn is just absolutely heartbreaking. And because of this, Mirror Force has spent a good amount of time on the ban list, being limited, semi-limited, and even banned at one point, although only for a few formats. I put Mirror Force above Imperial Order, even though Imperial Order could shut down certain decks that were spell heavy like Sky Strikers and Pendulums, because Mirror Force is just more iconic in my opinion, and even changed the way older players played the game, because you see, if your opponent had a card in their back row that you couldn't get rid of, in order to circumvent the possibility that it was Mirror Force, you would change some of your monsters to defense position just in case they used Mirror Force on you. That way, you would still have a monster left over, even after being hit by Mirror Force. Alright, and these are my top 10 old school cards that were used in Yugioh VRAINS. If you like the video, feel free to drop a like and subscribe, as I will be creating more videos just like this one.